Hi there. Welcome to Mushroom Hour. Today we are honored to be joined by Ryan Iacovacci, one of the founders of Myconaut LLC and one of the dynamic duo that is Moon Mountain in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. We've interviewed the other half, his other half, Amber, previously on the podcast, and we are so stoked to get into all the work that Ryan is doing. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on the Mushroom Hour.
Darren, it's an honor. A long-time listener, first-time caller here.
Well, when you told me that you listened to the show and you were really excited, there was like some early text messages. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so humbled. Like, what's going on? And then when you told me about the projects you're engaged in, my head kind of exploded. I'm so happy things have evolved and matriculated to the place where you're ready to talk about it. I'm really excited about kind of the bits and pieces I understand about what you've got going on. But why don't you tell us, because we've had an episode about Moon Mountain. I'll put that in the show notes where we interviewed Amber. But tell us about Myconaut. What is Myconaut? How did it start? Kind of dive in wherever you want to there.
Yeah, man, Darren, the work you've been doing on this is, I just want to speak to that like how inspiring and connecting. So many people I've reached out to that have been on your show, and I've made some beautiful connections. And you've really embodied the biomimetic mycelium and information sharing and open sourcing. And I just eternally grateful. Honestly, I feel like our company, my business partner, Joe Lane, we share podcasts from your show all the time. It's just like, hey, you got to listen to this one. And
no way.
This is a culmination of a lot of that, just inspiration of like, wow, we can do this. Like, people are doing this. And I feel like we are part of that story where my business partner and we don't have alphabet soup after our name. Like, we're just some forest wanderers, and like, we just try to tune in and listen to, Mother Nature's songs and try to learn, right? And now we're kind of in this business space and trying to commercialize stuff and bring things to scale to have more impact. But really, our company, Joe and I, we got our wild mushroom certification with the state of Michigan back in 2016. And we just started buying and selling wild mushrooms, farmers market. Like, we just started doing DIY stuff up here on Moon Mountain. We don't have, we have solar power and propane, but we're not connected to the grid. So we got to be a little more innovative around energy usage. And so we were doing anaerobic fermentation for pasteurizing wood chips and straw and inoculating mushrooms all over the property. And, we saw organic matter increase on our property like 1% a year after we started to inoculate with mulch, which 1% organic matter on an acre can hold, I think it's upwards of like 10,000 gallons of water, right?
Huge.
And a solid, this is like from like 0.6% organic matter. And now we're probably pushing like 5 to 7%. A solid farm is like 8% organic matter. A lot of the farms in the Midwest are below, 2%. So this is part of that process. So we just like engaged in a lot of regenerative stuff. And Joe started to grow mushrooms on cigarette butts, kind of being inspired by Peter McCoy. And we started growing on trash and mixing ashes and just weird things. And then we started seeing a lot of the research coming out around the pandemic. And I was growing medical cannabis for the state, in the state of Michigan here. And just seeing the magic of that plant and then connecting it with fungi. And it was like, the pandemic hit, and we got pregnant, and it was kind of like, I saw the writing on the wall with cannabis. It's going legalized, like the big guys are coming in. And Joe and I, it was like, man, let's start a business. There's nobody up here doing mushrooms in a real way. Like, let's get into the emerging space, not just the culinary mushrooms, but like, let's go big and like bioremediation and mycomaterials and kind of this emerging bioeconomy. So Myconaut, we kind of formed this opaque thing, and had a lot of support from just smart people, artists, and Nico out of Lansing, Worm, they go by, just put together our awesome logo and just really pushed us on articulating like, what are our values and what are we trying to embody. And so we've really stayed true to this, like this balance between so above, as above, so below, right? Like, kind of represent in our logo. And this is true, the inside and the outside. The soil is our gut inside. And so now Like this is the business model we're trying to bring forward, healing both the people and the planet, and inspiring innovation towards a regenerative economy, regenerative bioeconomy, right? Like that's what we want to build, and inspire people that you don't need to have a master's degree and a PhD and all this business experience. You are valued because you have a unique perspective. And the more unique perspectives we bring to the table, it's just going to hasten creativity. It's going to hasten solutions. And maybe this is kind of the hope of AI to some extent, right? The algorithms get better the more of us that participate. If we don't participate, well, those algorithms get bent towards nefarious purposes, right?
Absolutely. And your piece about AI there, I've been seeing more and more. It's funny how in biological exploration, right? Like the great frontiers of biology that we're all realizing how underexplored the world around us really is. Mycology seems to embody that in particular. And yes, suddenly a unique perspective, a willingness to ask different questions. You've now got a niche where you can expand. You don't need all the letters after your name. And AI fits into that landscape. I was just, I had Maria Finn on the show not that long ago, and she's hosting a talk down in Sausalito, California with a ocean researcher who is mapping phytoplankton and finding patterns on the ocean floor and using AI to map it. And it's somehow showing him better maps of our neural networks. So what you're saying, the as above, so below, kind of the biomorphic resonance, like everything around us somehow maps to an internal part. I mean, we're part of this nature that we're understanding. So it makes sense that there's similarities in biological form, but super far out, amazing. Love that being the ethos. Now, when you've referenced a couple kind of vivid things there, the medical cannabis growing, obviously mycomaterials, bioremediation, which has been notoriously hard for people to start businesses that work for that. I've had people on the show who ended up having to move in a different direction because mycoremediation or bioremediation wasn't there. So I want to talk about like exactly what projects you're working on, and we'll get into all of it, I'm sure. Quick question though before we dive in, because we are on 103.3 KPCA here in Petaluma, broadcasting in Sonoma County. You're listening to the Mushroom Hour with Ryan Iacovacci. Yeah, with Ryan Iacovacci.
Story of my life.
Yeah, with Ryan Iacovacci. And one thing you mentioned that piqued my interest was biological material on your farm. How do you know, just super fundamental question, when you referenced a percentage of biological material on your farm, how do you measure that? How do you know that?
Simple soil test. That's a real rote, process. Sending off soil samples to Logan Labs. We worked a little bit with Advancing Eco-Agriculture out of Middlefeld, Ohio, and John Kemp and that company. The stuff they're doing is mind-boggling, but using essentially, probiotic soil stimulants and trace mineral applications, and so foliar applications, fertigation of just very specific, a lot of humic acid, or not, I mean, parts per million, parts per billion of humic acids, but the power of just little additives, right? Permaculture says like incrementalism. And then once you kind of adjust the system will start to, grow on itself and produce. We're in a challenging microclimate in that we're 800 feet above Lake Superior and we're south facing. We're lucky our soil's sandy, so the water drains really well, but it gets hot. Like we're maybe, in the summertime, 30-40% humidity. It can get, 100 to 110 in the shade. Even though Lake Superior stays really cool and that cool air comes across, it can get really hot on the mountains. And so you get a lot of extremophiles up here, lichens and mosses and such, a lot of bryophytes. And so that's what we were dealing with, was just like bryophytes on compacted sand. And we just brought in wood chips and inoculated them, and then just testing the soil before we did the inoculation. And then I think it was like a 2 years later, we tested the soil again, and we saw that it was like 1.5% increase. And it was like, oh man, okay, now the system's, taking over. And then you just pull back the wood chips. What was, 12 inches of wood chips is now, I don't know, maybe 3 inches right on the top. And the rest of it's just like worms and mycelium and just rich, loamy, dark soil that's like, wow. An important factor is we get 250 inches of snow a year up here on average. This past winter was quite light, but that snowpack, critical, because fungal digestion comes up right into that alluvial zone between the snow and the ground. And so once the snow is on, it acts as an insulator. So all the mice are pooping in there, and it's that magical space where digestion is occurring over the wintertime. So the organic matter actually builds up faster with snowpack.
That's insane. And I appreciate you. First of all, super interesting to hear how the snowpack works like that. But I appreciate you laying out something that for you is really fundamental. But I think for folks listening, again, this is an area where, I mean, big agricultural heritage that's actually a little bit under threat, and there's some dynamics moving there. So really helpful to give people some tools to maybe enhance their land, enhance something that really everyone can apply, but thought really applicable here especially. Well, then tell us about how some of this comes together. I mean, just from that description, we're hearing about kind of Ryan as a soil nerd and understanding biological processes, and like all of this again goes to that ethos of why Myconaut comes together. But like I said, you talked about bioremediation, mycomaterials, medical cannabis. What are some of the pillars then of Myconaut projects you're working on, and maybe where some of those come together or how they're starting to come together?
I graduated with a degree in religious studies and international relations. So religion and politics and global economics, like that's what I studied, right? So comparative Eastern and Western religions.
Okay.
What I took away from all of that was like, I need to act local to really build economic resilience from the ground up. And I need to find purpose and meaning in my life first before anything else. And I worked and volunteered for a small CSA biodynamic organic farm in Tampa called Sweetwater. And we would take college students down. And it was just so much fun. Everybody getting dirty, and we danced, and it was just all that great stuff. And it was just I realized, and this was in my like early 20s, right? Like that this is dignifying and it's meaningful, and it's like we can create such a beautiful world just by putting our hands back in the soil. And so my experiences from there on, and getting to go to Cuba and seeing how Cuban agriculture works, and I traveled around Florida and looked at hundreds, if not thousands, of farms over the course of time, from aquaculture to beyond organic and conventional, and coalition of immokalee workers I worked with for many years. Just seeing how the systems work, and just the injustice in a lot of our food system. And so I kind of focused my energies, in there. For me, Myconaut is like this art that I'm bringing forward as kind of the understanding that fungi are the orchestrators, right? Maybe of everything, right? That we serve those microbes.
Yeah, that's right. Who's in charge? Who's farming who? Yeah.
Right. What does Stamets say? That maybe it's the mother of all life.
Yeah.
The consciousness, the sentience that is shaping winners and losers intentionally. And so, giving honor to fungi that have played such a role in my life, from early psilocybin experiences that pushed me out of the realm of being a sports. I was playing Division I football for University of South Florida. I was gearing up to go into like FBI and kick in doors on a SWAT team. And then I made this pivot into self-knowledge and like asking the question of who I want to become and tuning into myself. And it led me into agriculture. It led me into this space.
Yeah.
And fungi maybe have been calling to me for years, waiting for me patiently. And so here I am, right? And man, Myconaut, like the pillars that really like that hold up our company that we've been focusing on, right? It's bringing regenerative ideas in creative ways into spaces that are underserved. Bioremediation, in my experience, is definitely one of those spaces where large engineering firms, they specialize in bacterias, they specialize in enzymes, they really are data driven, and they can't quite understand directed evolution. Like horizontal gene transfers,
right.
They can't get their fingers on the mystery of nature. Well, because that's intuition based currently. And that's, I feel like, what has been speaking to me from all of the different farms that I've seen over the years, and the best farmers, those are the bioremediation specialists, guaranteed. And that mystery of their soils, like that's what I'm understanding is what we're diving into to zoom in into that mystery a little bit, verify for those meritocracy, that meritocracy that says you have to, validate. Sure, we'll play your game, but there's still so much mystery, and I think we're trying to dial it back and say, look, instead of this kind of was it Alan Savory methodology, like we don't need just peer review because that's the institutions that are based on previous peer review, so it's all just self-reinforcing. Let's observe and derive inspiration from there, and then see if it's repeatable. Then we can zoom in and use some of these tools of LC mass spec, NMR, gene sequencing, and start to give us better insights to build on top of our intuition of what we already know, right? Like smell the soil, right?
Yeah. Well, I almost think of it as like a backwards engineering, right? You don't have to know the granularity of every input and output, but you can see the system, observe the system, learn things of how it works. You don't even have to know why, but understand kind of what you put in, what that leads to, and you start to get a deeper understanding just by touching it and engaging with it. I like that process. And then you can start figuring out, okay, how do we zoom in and see what these components are that are creating healthy soil? So I like that approach.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what I'm trying to be smart enough to know how stupid I am, right? I've read all of Jeff Lowenfeld's stuff. I've read all of Stamets stuff. I'm digging into Peter McCoy's stuff, digging into all these other people that are way smarter than me. Well, now, okay, I see the vision. I get the picture and where the gaps are. Now I'm going to lean on my network locally, and I'm going to weave together a symbiotic partnership with people that fill in my gaps, but see the vision of what we're working towards together. So there's a feedback and a dialectic that emerges. And this is the leadership I'm understanding that's kind of my role in that, building these partnerships and helping us create this larger organism that's greater than the parts. And truly, I think one of the other pillars that underpins Myconaut is Joe and I, my business partner, our friendship. That it's truly like a Samwise and a Frodo kind of partnership. That like there's this brotherly love, that's like we're gonna go to the ends of the earth to destroy the ring, and Golem might have to bite it off my finger still, right? But like we're gonna go to the end, and we're gonna carry each other. And I think that for me is what makes our company really unique, because Joe isn't like, when we get together, we just nerd out and get creative and innovate. And we go down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, we just went into some white papers. We just validated a really out there idea on some research. Now we can weave it together with other pieces that we know from our background experience. And now we've got a potential commercializable product. So this is a good example. And I'm going to try to not get too wild, but like, and I've talked to folks at MycoWorks and Ecovative and all these people that are coming out with cool myco materials, and they say it's like 10 to 20 years off, but I think we're a lot closer. Okay, so let's take this problem of PFAS, for example. This is one of our projects that we're really working on. We've got some exciting announcements around this too. So there's PFAS on farm fields because farmers have been applying biosolids on their fields unknowingly that there's PFAS in it, often from wastewater treatment facilities. This is a big problem nationwide, globally, potentially, right?
PFAS is entering the common lexicon. We're all aware of it. It's a problem.
EPA, just this past week, dropped drinking water standards for the U.S. Something like 100 million people are drinking PFAS every day in the U.S. In parts per billion, parts per trillion. It is an endocrine disrupting compound that is very sticky. It's kind of like a soap, and it's been very effective on Teflon and water repellents. And it's the wizard's dilemma. We've created this magic, and now it's out of control. And it's like, oh my God, it's everywhere. It's in all of us. It's bioaccumulating. It's messing up our reproductive systems. What do we do? And so it's in our food system, whether it's in packaging materials or it's literally in the biomass of the vegetables. In Maine, they started to shut down farms because of this. And our food system, Darren, and I don't want to
give us the real picture. Yeah.
Our food system is very delicate right now. The federal government has authority to shut down, and state governments to shut down farms because of this pollutant. So there was a farm in Michigan that was ordered a kill order for all of their cattle because they were applying biosolids to the hay fields and feeding the cattle hay, and the PFAS accumulated in the meat. And so they said, but this guy, small farmer, he's got 400 acres. Like, this guy's peanuts compared to Tyson and Hormel, right? And all these huge companies that guaranteed they got PFAS in the meat. If the government looked at all those farms across the board, our food system is the next big PFAS thing that nobody wants to talk about, because the second we start looking under the hood, it's going to be scary. Now, the toxicology is still out on it. Like, how much can build up in our bodies? Like, there are people right now that have an insane amount of PFAS compounds in their body, and they're still alive, and they're fighting for more transparency in solutions. Okay, so we're taking this on with farm fields. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, if you know, and I'm sure you do, what is that chemistry of PFAS? Why is it doing damage in our system? If you can give that soundbite, just so people know, because we've all heard the term. It's one of those things we know is bad, right? But it gets lumped in with like BPA, all these different acronyms. But what is PFAS, and why is it causing problems potentially for people? Why is it an endocrine disruptor?
Sure. So it is a carbon and a fluorine that form the strongest bond that science knows currently. Fluorine is the most reactive element on the table. That's F negative, right? And it occurs naturally. It's in our water naturally to some extent. It's in calcium fluoride. It binds. It's currently mined out of China, and then they dissolve it and they isolate the fluorine, and then they attach it to a carbon. And then there's like upwards of 1 million different combinations of this carbon fluorine, hydrogen sulfide, like combinations that make it do different things. For firefighting foams to Teflon to water repellent, it's a very valuable compound, but it's very recalcitrant. It doesn't break down except into maybe from long chains to short chains to ultra short chains, similar to nanoplastics, right? They just keep on breaking down into smaller components. So then they're able to absorb into our bodies because, obviously through our gut lining and so forth, but then our body tries to detox it through our endocrine system, which also regulates hormones, thyroid, lymph nodes, and so forth. It mimics iodine.
Oh, so it maybe binds in the same places that iodine would.
So if you're trying to detox it from your body, tissue, it's not clear how to get it out of tissue. Maybe sweating, working out, pushing it through the body a little bit. Blood transfusions, just giving blood actually cleans PFAS from your blood, very cheap, and you can get paid for plasma. So that's something that could be helpful if people are worried about it. But if you're going to kick out, let's say you do a thyroid or an endocrine system detox, you have to also be putting in the iodine so that it takes out the PFAS and then replaces with iodine.
So you've given us a little bit of a regimen ourselves, kind of take control of our own health and maybe do something about the PFAS bioaccumulation in all of our systems.
Especially our children, I think, that are more sensitive to pollutants than older, generations that are a little more resilient. Before these chemicals, were so ubiquitous, though they've been around for 50 plus years, so they're in the system. They're everywhere. They're in all of us. They're climbing the hydrological cycle, and they're raining down on us like microplastics that have been identified. So this is a problem that's all hands on deck. We don't know how bad it's going to be, but we got to find solutions that go beyond destruction.
Yes.
In my opinion, destruction is where the technology is kind of moving, where everybody's saying, let's break apart this carbon fluorine and then do something with it. That's very energy intensive. It doesn't seem scalable at this moment. It's one of the tools in the toolbox, but we don't know the fate of these molecules is what's happening. And EPA is only regulating 10 compounds. Most laboratories test for 43 compounds based on the EPA standards, but there's upwards of 1 million plus combinations that we don't know what the effects are. There's a lot of unknowns, and we're at the tip of the iceberg on this. So here's now, we have told you how bad it is, right? Like, this is
right.
It's in our
But Ryan
system.
sees potential solutions. Sees an opportunity to engage nature to do something here.
And so Mother Nature, she knows this, right? She's already genetically has this information that we're then discovering. So our partners at the University of Minnesota, who we partnered with on a National Science Foundation, SBIR, which, Darren, you're the first to hear this publicly, that we are been recommended for funding, and we are going to expand internal research on validating what the University of Minnesota has demonstrated, and we're going to expand on this. And so what they demonstrated was a fungal species was able to break apart that carbon-fluorine bond in liquid culture. So that alone is huge. It was at a slow rate. We've got to replicate it and demonstrate. But that in and of itself, liquid culture in a white rot fungi is very different than in soil in a mycorrhizal species, right? Fungi are opportunistic.
Yeah.
Why they're not going to go to a carbon food source if they have to expend more energy to break apart that carbon-fluorine bond. They're going to look for a cheaper food source, right?
Right. So in liquid culture, that's their only option potentially, is to break this apart. So suddenly they're willing to, as we know, those emerging kind of capacities of fungi that when in need show themselves. But now we need to figure out how to translate that out of that liquid culture into the soil, into the environment.
And there's going to be different applications. I think that for water treatment facilities using enzymes and acids that fungi produce, that can help to alleviate some of those water treatment systems, I think will be very effective. There are already some companies that are employing some of this biotech. I think that in soil, either mineralization or phytoextraction, that's where we're kind of focusing our energies to dial in those algorithms for locking things up in the soil and sequestering carbon so they don't leach into the water table, and or dialing up those metabolic transport pathways into the biomass so that we can extract it, say, from a farm field and growing hemp, and then mine and cut that hemp and bale it. And so now the farmer can get back to regulatory compliance and can grow food again that's clean. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So you're concentrating and drawing up these contaminants. So that's what phytoextraction is. It's using plant materials, probably in conjunction with some kind of microbial ally, to break down and draw up these components of something like PFAS into the plant. And then the plant mass is removed. Suddenly you're making a dent, probably, in the amount of contaminants in that soil.
Yep. So that's really step one, that we're working with some really amazing partners. The Remediators, a company out of the Pacific Northwest that's been working with us for a few years. They've demonstrated this with some other halogenated compounds in the University of Washington and some big laboratories. A gentleman by the name of Howard Sprouse, he actually worked with Mr. Stamets over at one of the big laboratories. Then that diesel experiment they did on the wood chips. So he was a part of that. He then took it to the field and has been building this technology that he calls the integrated biological approach. And it's using microbes, plants, endophytes, biochar in these unique algorithms to rebuild soil. So we're working with them and taking that methodology, and then we're zooming in and using some of the more affordable scientific tools to really find those levers and dials to ramp up this process for different client needs.
Super, super exciting. And I love seeing this emerging technology where it literally is biotechnology. I think for so many of us, I was just had Emily Davis on the show, who you may have heard of, big in biochar, mycoremediation, Hyphae Princess. If you don't know her already, I definitely want to connect you guys because there's probably some overlap. She was doing some biochar experiments in Puerto Rico. And we were talking about, it might have even been after the show, how our concept of technology now is so locked into like plastic and metal and like our vision. And when we think about technology and what those devices and things look like, and how amazing is it to think of that, no, the highest technology, or the technology that's going to inspire the most hope, is literal organisms and biomaterial, where we're figuring out combinations and how to apply them together to let environments heal themselves. Like the highest form of technology is not some artificial thing we mine and melt down, but literally harvesting and understanding our ecology so well where we're able to take those constituent parts and apply them artfully to make massive change. It's just a really exciting flip for me in my own mind of what technology is and what kind of our highest like form of technology will look like.
Totally. And I think that as AI becomes more ubiquitous, what's gonna differentiate us is our intuition and our creativity as individuals, as humans. It's going to challenge us to find out what makes us most human.
Yeah.
Because machines can't be lazy. Humans can be lazy. And that also happens to be where we get the biggest insights, right? I mean,
laziness.
Totally. It's the Werner Herzog, lo and behold, the birth of the internet, movie that he made. It's like, does the internet dream of itself? Where do we go when we dream? These are those
Yeah.
that liminal space of creativity where we get insights, and then it's like, oh man, I got to get up and write this down. This was a crazy idea. Like,
That's a great point. That's what humans have. That's our advantage over the machines is we're able to go in some magical liminal space and pull ideas from some collective unconscious or yeah, I like that. That gives me hope
I
for
want the machines to appreciate us for that and not resent and envy us, right? I want to like say, hey, this is our gift, and you guys have a gift too, that we can work together to live symbiotically, like everything else that's on that is life. That have you seen? Gosh, what's the Scavenger's Reign is a good one. Like where this biotech merging with just the tech and biology merging together and wet computing, right? Mycelium running on microchips and then
yeah.
beginning to that I see that future is so beautiful potentially.
And yes, and it can be beneficent, especially if we consciously take control of that co-evolution and don't just let it kind of happen by, big institutional, big centers of concentrated power and decision making. Don't make all those decisions for us. I think we can have a much more beneficent future with that integration of, this emerging high biotechnology and the silica technology, basically silicon technology.
And I think the Amish, or broadly the Anabaptists are a really great example of like I don't think it's necessarily control there, or I guess control in the sense of like self-reflection, like
Hmm.
what is this technology's benefit, and then what's the cost? What do we lose when we
Yeah.
gain this convenience? And the Amish or the Mennonites and all the Anabaptists, they do a really good job decentralized by their community to say, based on the community's needs and their context, they will accept certain technologies or not. And frankly, they're the ones that have been very skeptical of genetically modified organisms, rightfully so, very skeptical of pesticide application. They are still building, to this day, soil organic matter using horses and manure and are leading the charge. And Advancing EcoAg is one of those companies that's owned by an Amish gentleman, John Kemp. And they are like converting large scale corn and soy farms to beyond organic methods,
Hmm.
restoring soil biology. Like the Amish are America's like saving grace in so many ways.
Absolutely. I think so many people, when they really get face down, whether it's PFAS or some problem in the world that is hard to face, there's a period where we all want to run away and like the Amish got it right. Yes, we should get, but I love to hear that it's actually like, no, they're consciously choosing in certain pieces. And maybe we can all take a more conscious approach like that and learn from them and better kind of because evolution's happening all the time, whether it's conscious or not, make a more considered choice in some of these matters. Just to bring us back though to your example of the phytoextraction, kind of the next obvious question that I forgot to ask. Let's say we're pulling these contaminants out of the soil into plant matter. What happens to the plant material?
That is the million, billion, $1 trillion question. So this is where then our next partnership that we're happy to announce with a little microchip manufacturer called NVIDIA.
Oh yeah, those
That
small company up and comers.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
they're just startup
yeah.
more or less, and they've accepted us into one of their startup programs called Inception, where we get access to all their AI tools and their team technicians and their networks. And so we're building essentially an AI platform, a language model platform that can help us discover the biogeochemical solutions for PFAS initially, but then we're going to build it out into other soil pollutants. And because here's the thing, Darren, there's already companies out there that have patents and they have scalable projects where they are on old mining tailing sites where the tailings that are left behind aren't valuable for the mining company because they're just too much energy to go in. Well, they're growing grasses on these tailing sites and they're able to extract from the soil into the grass. They cut it like hay, they pyrolyze it to make biochar, and then they can concentrate that nickel into solution and fractionate it from there, which is part of this like bioleeching, bioremediation space that the mining companies know this very intimately.
That dovetails so well. Like I said, with Emily Davis's work, she was hipping me to what biochar was and what pyrolysis is and the outputs that come from that. So that may be the eventual fate of biomaterial that uptakes some of these compounds, is actually a pyrolysis that does something with the gas and liquid, and maybe the contaminants emerge in those outflows.
So we have to really understand the biogeochemistry and the fate of these molecules. But one of the things that we're finding in our experiments in-house is that some of these PFAS compounds, we're working with two of the major ones, PFOA and PFOS, that they're actually decreasing in liquid culture, which means to us that those compounds are getting into the mycelial bodies. So what is mycelial body is, or any of the fungal bodies, they're chitin, right? It's a carbon base. So think about this. Now we're demonstrating that these fluorinated surfactants, which have heat and radiation resistance, are in mycelium. We are taking that and we are building those into 3D printable fluorinated biopolymers and fluorinated myco leathers, we'll say. So imagine self-healing, bioactive spacesuits that are high melanated to resist the radiation from the sun based on Dr. Dadachova's research.
That's right.
And have fluorinated compounds in them that make them heat resistant. So you can be in space with a self-healing mushroom leather spacesuit. When there's a pinhole on the ISS from a particle of whatever space trash, you can 3D print a caulking that's a chitin base that's got some biochar graphene, super strong mixture that you poke in that hole so you stop leaking air. But then you're growing the mushrooms on the spaceship that are feeding you. You're cycling all of your waste products, paper products. You're then able to 3D print those mycomaterials, extract the mycelium. It becomes then a circular economy right there on the spaceship. Now, it gets even crazier, Darren. I'm gonna paint you a bigger vision.
Yeah.
You can take the fungi and make what's called it's a type of nanoparticle that's around chitin that uses the fluorine, the carbon-fluorine, for propulsion. So you can take what's called ionic plasma thrusters, and we're going to demonstrate this. We're going to build this, and you can, instead of using xenon gas, you can use these fluorinated polymers and sprinkle them as the propellant for the ion thrusters.
Because as a particle, they mimic the xenon gas that you would normally use sufficiently that it can be used in this thruster. It's just the shape and the size of the particle. Is that the...
Well, we've got to demonstrate it. I think there's a lot of details in the science that we're building.
But
this is the vision. This is the vision. We're taking mushrooms into space. We're cleaning up the PFAS on Earth. We're concentrating it into an upcycled value add pathway, right?
Yeah.
That then can be used for space application. Let's get it off planet Earth and use it to expand human consciousness, because those compounds are valuable. And the law of thermodynamics says matter is not created or destroyed. Let's be real. Let's figure out an honest pathway to upcycle and keep these, to build an economy around remediation. Don't just clean up for the sake of cleaning up. Let's value add it. Let's be real.
Let's do something with it. And as you said from the start, your analogy of the wizard's dilemma, I mean, these were magical compounds that were made. We went too far. They got into everything. We didn't know the negatives that would come from it. But how amazing to be able to then channel a different discipline and take that what is essentially a mind-blowing chemical that we were able to create in so many forms, and then use that and conscript it into a different process. And what you're laying out there, as fantastical as that vision seems, first of all, I feel like every single vision of science fiction into the future knows that fungi are the solution. Like whether you're talking about the Expanse series or whatever, like fungi are always the solution in outer space. So not far-fetched, not a new concept, I would say. But that science of actually the mycelium taking in, because mycelium, we know, sequesters so many things in all of those hyphal threads. So the fact that it would sequester these very unique compounds with, like we said, magical properties, I mean, then that mycelium could be used and take on the properties of what they are sequestering. That's not that far-fetched. I mean, that's for me, very grounded. It's just, how do you apply it to, use in a 3D printing process. And that's where my ignorance of how that process works comes into play. But I would imagine you would load it up in a cartridge like any other material and print what you want to print.
Hydrogels are the kind of the avenue for that. And I think this is just, one kind of visionary example that I think once we get the biogeochemistry and we build these language models that like we can, work with anybody on this, like a GPT, pay $10 a month and you can then add into it and get access to this huge database. Once we get companies like 3M that have created some of this problem, DuPont, Chemours, Dow, we need them. They're not the enemy. Sure, we can point fingers. It's like the Iraq War and Afghanistan war. We know who's guilty. We
Right.
know who but in truth, all of us are responsible.
Yes.
We wanted these conveniences of nonstick, Teflon. We wanted water repellent. We thought it was going to be great, but now we're responsible to clean it up. And I think, Darren, this is something that transfers us from a child mentality to an adult mentality. And this is our generation, right? The Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, we're all kind of in this stage of like, wow, this situation is so screwed up, right? But it's not one to just say, you're the problem, point fingers. No. Let's all take responsibility. We're all in this together. This is one boat. Like,
Yeah.
And if we can work together and put aside our differences and focus on the fact that we're trying to do better than the previous generations, we need those people that created the problem because they're going to help accelerate the solutions. And frankly, they've got the money to pay for all of this, and we need that.
There's so much I want to pick up there. I'm just going to remind our listeners, we're on 103.3 KPCA in Petaluma. We're talking with Ryan Iacovacci about a wondrous vision of the future where we're able to heal our soils with the help of fungi and then use that same fungi to potentially make mycomaterials and spacesuits and rocket engines. And what you've just laid out there, this idea that it is these big industrial players that, again, it's easy to assign blame, and we've kind of already done that. People have made the documentaries, made the case, shown why we have a contaminated planet. But like you're saying, it's time to have the maturity to say that doesn't fix it. How do we actually fix it? And something I'm hearing in what you're saying, something Phil Ross told me, which was we can't disengage from the industrial processes. Like those are here. They have created the world we live in. And honestly, they're the only thing with the scale and capacity to make the kind of big change required that we want to see to kind of implement some of these healing and regenerative technologies. It's about how do we take that existing system, right? As a fungus, we take that host and now we conscript it to our needs. And you're saying exactly that. I'm not surprised.
And I think there's tragically, it's rife with opportunity from East Palestine in Ohio to, to Gaza, frankly, to, you name a part of the world where there are people willing to do this work, that if we can inspire, solutions, it's like you first have to start at the material conditions, right? Planting plants, cleaning soils. That's where it all begins. And then from there, we can begin to build, a reflection of a just system, something that doesn't fight against the current system, but is more resilient than the current fragile system of this entrenchment between governments and corporations. That's like, it's not serving life. And I think this is the next consciousness evolution in how do we, and AI is going to tell us, I think, a lot of this. I don't want to say it's like an oracle, but it's going to reflect back to us and say like, man, you guys are really doing this stuff wrong, whether it's John Deere or it's Elon Musk or it's, governments, they're going to get honest feedback from AI, and AI is going to say, this is really what's going on. And either you're going to perish or you can make decisions that are more reflective of nature in totality.
This is assuming those same people don't fund the AI that we're using, right? And that's kind of programmed in there. But I'm curious how, because you referenced like having a GPT for almost this microbial soil remediation knowledge. How are you guys planning to conscript AI? Because I've heard it used to obviously analyze huge data sets, right? And find similarities and understand what's going on. I've even heard it now using in emerging like fungal genetic analyses where we're taking whole genomes and it's able to actually analyze the whole thing. How are you guys enlisting AI? What do you think that future looks like? And just to frame it again, you're a private company doing all of this. Obviously, I wouldn't think you could be completely open source, but maybe somehow creating a GPT plays into that. Talk about how AI fits in, and if you want to touch on like how you're sharing this information?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting very small, like internally in the company, and just making sure that we're getting really unique data sets.
Okay.
And that's, I think, what makes our company a little bit different. And so, this is, it's my business partner and I's intuition. We're blessed with the forests up here that we have very dynamic woods. We have old growth stands, right? I think it's something like 10 to 20 million species of fungi, right? Kingdom fungi, something like this. We maybe understand like less than 10% genetically.
Right.
And most of them are non-fruiting. So we have a long way to go to just sequence that and understand all those mysteries within genetic code. And so I think what we're trying to look at is in soil evolution. Like, how do microbes share genetic data over time? And how do we derive intuition around that?
Mm.
And to then observe and to compare. And so for now, we're just like, we're internalizing data. We've got a couple partners that are key, with some data sharing. But hopefully, in the next couple of years, we'll really be able to open this up into kind of a open source model as well as a SaaS model, that anybody, if you're a backyard gardener, if you're a farmer, if you're 3M, you can access this program, this platform, and get deeper insights and a stronger hypothesis for what your solution is. And so what we're going to offer is basically, it's like, you can put in your inputs and get a prescription. That's a recommendation. And we can help interpret that and help scale it with engineering companies, different plants. We can actually manufacture the microbial inoculum that's site specific to your challenges.
That's the dream. When I've talked with so many people and you finally get that insight that healing the soil is the first step, like you're saying, really along with that, or even before, is that key step of observation. And I feel like you guys have really engaged in that work of observing processes. I mean, it helps that you're on a permaculture farm there and getting to embody some of these principles, try things, observe how systems work. Now you and your business partner are able to extract that kind of observation and learning. And then we can start with, okay, for the wider public, if they're able to take what you've learned in your observations, the relationships that you've found between microbes and contaminants or potential soil conditions you're trying to change, you now give people the tools to at least apply some start to the solution, start to heal that soil. The spacesuits and rocket ships come later, but we got to start with healing the soil. You've done that huge observational work, the networking, connecting all the insights and tech that already kind of exists that are dealing with different parts, bring it into kind of a cohesive solution set. So really exciting because this path, the timelines you're laying out, it's like seems quicker than I think it would be.
I mean, we're going to have to hit the gas pedal, and it's really going to be our partnerships with engineering companies and other mycological based companies, gene sequencing. This is about partnership. Like we don't have time to be petty with competition. I understand my lawyers and investors would hate this. Like, oh, you got to patent everything and like control it. And it's like, there's going to be so much that will blossom from this. Like, everybody's going to be able to eat. Like, if that's our concern, is to be able to feed our families clean food, right, and clean water. Like,
right.
Let's get there first, and then we can worry about like all the other stuff. Like, capitalism has a beautiful piece of innovation around it. Despite all of the negative aspects aside, that feudalism still exists within capitalism, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But like, let's focus on the solutions, and we can then figure out all that litigiousness afterwards. Like, I'm so exhausted of the fear-based, scarcity-based mindset. Like, wild foraging really has taught me that we live in abundance, that there's so much more we can eat. That food is not scarce. This is not true. This is a falsity, that's been fed to us. And from that abundance, moving in time and space then has a different connotation. It's more love-based,
Well, and that gets to this definition of what is abundance, right? If you guys are helping build biological abundance, if you're unlocking our current natural systems to flourish, there will be such an abundance of, food, but every form of biological life. That's the abundance I want. It's like we already did the trying to fight for monetary abundance. The people who got there are still subject to these problems. So I love
Mhm.
that you're taking that attitude of like, let's fix that problem, get this system working the way it should be. There will be, because money is energy, it's an imperfect translator of that.
Right.
But there will be plenty of that too that comes along with fixing the system and the explosion of abundance that comes from that. There's some really interesting research actually going on in Napa here in California with the cleanup of the Napa River and what that has meant for that local economy. Of course it would. But it's like caused this explosion in the local economy when you clean up the river. So that concept, you heal this natural environment. Don't trip about the money. That will explode. Abundance will explode in every form.
As above, so below. If we heal the soil, we have to heal ourselves
Mm,
somatically, spiritually,
mm.
and that is the way that we're actually going to heal soils in our own communities is that symbiotic dialectic interaction. That's really, I mean, we can't do it all. I'm not trying to think that like we're going to be the ones to do, no, we're just one cog in this bigger organism that's like, we're sharing genetic information and we're building towards more resilience. I think Dr. Zach Bush really points a good evolutionary historical process that xenobiosis, that evolutionary pressure comes down, right? And it pushes into a smaller pool as we're in the 6X, this mass extinction. But every time what happens, diversity explodes, right? Into things that could have never been
Right.
predicted.
Right.
Asteroids that took out the dinosaurs, whatever, exploded. We went down to 1% of that genetic diversity. We all come from that insanely small genetic pool. Elephants and chihuahuas come from the same genetic pool. That's crazy.
That's crazy, Eddie. And I love that you just referenced Zach Bush. Of course you would know, but he has been such a like guiding light for the past 3 or 4 years for me. But yeah, that idea of systems under stress, whether it's like weeds or new virus or whatever, like it throws out wild diversity when it's under stress. And maybe Ryan is an embodiment of that. But just because I know people listening are going to be super intrigued, they want to learn more. I know there's kind of a ramp up to potential opportunities to help with where do people go to get more information?
Absolutely. Of course, we're on the Instagrams, LinkedIn, and our website, myconaut.space. You can find more information there to engage. And, hopefully we'll be able to open source to people and say, send us your soil sample and we'll gene sequence it and look at pollutants in it. And we'll, just start building this database so citizen scientists have an avenue to be empowered. I mean, that's really what gets my business partner and I going, is like, we want to engage more citizen science to then the amateurs, the people that love this, that do it for the love, that's who's going to change the game.
Absolutely. And I have a feeling it's going to be connections of people like yourself. I'm sure you're aware of Matt Powers and his work.
Love him. Yeah.
And so when I talk to people like you, like Matt, there's like this vision emerging, and almost universally, one of the key components of that, like, it's not about me. We're all like doing this thing that we see as the future. So there's some kind of collective consciousness of maybe all the microbes, maybe like you were saying, all the microbes are just activating certain people to say, all right, this is the new direction. You are a channel. Let's go. And I think it's beautiful that it's, people that don't necessarily have a professional scientific background that are really getting people excited and activated about it and trying new things, because that lets us all know that it's possible. We can all be channels of the microbial emerging regenerative consciousness.
Absolutely. Man, absolutely. I think it's like know thyself and everything else comes from that. And the more that I try to dig into my own issues and my own traumas, I find that things unlock more and more in my life and things manifest. And people say, well, Ryan, you're a white male, you're a privilege. Okay, I can recognize that. And what I think it has provided me is a bird's eye view to say, yeah, the system is horribly unjust. It is totally screwed up. And I talk to those people in the higher echelons, right? But I also have done work with the destitute, and I see there's a similar mentality of entitlement that exists in different echelons, especially American culture. United States American culture is really, I think there's a toxin within all of our hearts in this country that we first have to deal with. Like Mother Nature and being in the wild reminds you life is fragile. Mother Nature is resilient. Our life, we are very fragile. The wolf, a hungry wolf, will not think twice and don't care about how much money you got in the bank or what your privilege is. If they're hungry, they're hungry. And so I think I don't know, the next evolution is like, sure, we can recognize the opportunities and the privileges that we all have. And in this country, compared to the rest of the world, we all have a bunch of privileges, and to be grateful for those. But it's about how we use them.
Yes.
And what we do with them and the legacy that we leave. Is it just for selfish purposes? Well, yeah, that's the norm in this country. But can we do something more than just philanthropy, right? Dr. King, more than just flicking a coin to a beggar, right? But actually questioning an edifice, a structure that gives rise to the beggars. That's true charity. And I think that's the next evolution.
And it's only possible with people at higher echelons of privilege engaging in that work, really, to turn back the monolith or to deconstruct it or reconstruct it or evolve it. So yes, there's assigning blame, but then there's at every level getting activated and taking action.
Well, and I think it's connecting. It's like, go sit with a houseless person and talk with them. Be human.
Yeah.
Work with a struggling artist and understand the plight, understand these things. Once we're in communion together, that's when beautiful things occur. That's when the creativity explodes. It's not just everybody being isolated in their silos, but it's having these third spaces where everybody can connect and everybody has a valuable, perspective, and honoring the soul and the spirit in that person and hearing them and listening, right, as an act of love.
It's a call to connection. It's a call to embrace the soil. It's a call into biotechnology. Everybody go to myconaut.space and learn more. Ryan, we could do 10 more episodes, but so much potent information. I love what you're bringing through. Seriously, what an honor to try to keep up with kind of someone who's doing such great work. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the Mushroom Hour podcast.
Darren, it's an honor, and I hope you'll have me back, and we'll have some more exciting news